What's the most intriguing bare knuckle fight that we could see this year, in your opinion?
I'd like to see Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler fight bare knuckle. That's not going to happen, but I would love to see that.
The Paul brothers are part of combat sports. You know, Jake has achieved some stuff as a boxer, probably won't be a world champion. Now he's fighting his brother. What do you make of it?
Exhibition. If you put the label exhibition on something, it is no longer a professional sanctioned fight. And that is pro wrestling. My suspicion is that Jake Paul and Logan Paul will have an exhibition match. You'll go to jail for 100 years. You'll be buried in the desert by MGM Grand if they lose $100 million because you fixed a fight. It cannot be done in modern times. I barely watch the UFC.
I remember when you were on Rogan, I think a couple times back in the day, and like he speaks super highly of you. How powerful is he and how influential for the casual fan to have the biggest podcaster in the world sat there in the UFC? It's wild.
When you look at the great Joe Rogan, you can say, well, he's the biggest podcaster and he's a UFC commentator. Or you can say he's a UFC commentator and he's the biggest podcaster.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined by the one and only Robin Black, from glam rock star to MMA analyst, commentator, fighter, personality, the one and only. I've had the pleasure of meeting Robin in Myanmar, commentating on Letway. How many people can say that? So that's full disclosure before we begin. This man is one of the most passionate people about combat sports I've ever met. So Robin, great to see you. How's it going?
Good to see you too, brother. We didn't just meet in Myanmar. We got to work together, but also I think I remember it as being 9 or 10 days. Didn't it feel like that? Like a big chunk of time around before, during, and after.
Yeah, well, it was a mission over for you from Canada, slightly easier for me from Malaysia, but
Yes.
what a very cool place and way to meet somebody. Dave LeDuc's retirement fight, although I hear some rumors that he's coming back again. So that'll be cool.
Yeah, he actually has fought since. Dave LeDuc fought the first Letway World Championship in Cheyenne, Wyoming, during the heart of COVID, and I flew from Canada to a saloon in Wyoming to commentate that fight too.
I remember. I think I was sat in this chair, locked up, watching it. Cyrus Washington, and he beat the brakes off him, and you were there interviewing him afterwards. It was cool.
Yeah, he sure did. And then I was in Slovakia. Dave put on an MMA show with Letway fights, or a blended martial arts show, and I flew there to commentate that. Dave's a fascinating guy. He's a brilliant fighter, combat artist, martial artist, but he's also a wild thinker, like a really interesting, innovative thinker. And that was really wild. I get to do some incredible things. I really do. I wake up very grateful in the mornings, man.
Well, if you could tell most people when they're a kid, or one day you're going to be a rock star, one day you're going to fight professionally, one day you're going to be on TV, it's all about creating a brilliant story to leave behind, right? And I feel like you've just got story after story, which is why, you know, we could sit here talking for hours about combat sports. But, well, firstly, since we're talking about Dave, I hear he's coming back, and his goal is to fight Mike Perry. He's a very good salesman, Dave, and, you know, he's been on Joe Rogan. He's got 2 million followers. I would put nothing past him. How do you feel about this huge bare knuckle phenomenon that we go centuries old, but now bare knuckle is having its time in the sun? How do you feel about it?
So you saying the sentence centuries old is actually a huge root for the way that I look at martial arts like these. You know, bare knuckle fighting, fist fighting is ancient. You know, the fact that at different times during like an ever-changing span of human history, there are blips where things are big. If you're not thinking of the world that way, and you're just in the water you're in, you're like, wow, this is huge. Well, this is the biggest, fastest growing. These things happen over and over and over again. And I think looking at fighting that way and looking at life that way is a really important thing. I think it lets you contextualize a lot of these things. It's cool that Americans like the blood and guts aspect of bare knuckle fighting. It's beautiful that the British and the Welsh and the Irish and the Scottish like the classical, like gentleman nature of it. You know, it's cool that that in Myanmar for a thousand years, they're like, hey, we've always done this. But yeah, in the context of history, this isn't that big a deal. But in the right now, in the hot of right now, Eddie Alvarez just put 16,000 people in an arena in Philadelphia to have a fist fight with Jeremy Stevens with no gloves on, and that's really cool. I was working the night before, and I rarely get a chance to just jump on a plane and go somewhere as a fan. And I told my wife, we have so much going on in life, I just couldn't do it. But I told my wife, it's like, when I wrap this, I want to get on a plane. I want to go to Philly. They'll give me a nice seat as a fan, and I know Eddie, and I want to watch Eddie do this. I never got a chance to do it. I watched it on my screen. But these are compelling things right this minute, you know?
I don't think we ever thought we'd see Eddie Alvarez, maybe not even Jeremy Stevens 10 years ago, like that. Like you say, selling out Philly, bare knuckle. Interesting things are happening. And then
Yeah.
you've got Conor McGregor stepping in there saying he wants to fight Jeremy Stevens. That's not a fight we maybe would have seen happening in bare knuckle. What's the most intriguing bare knuckle fight that we could see this year, in your opinion, or for you?
The fight that we never got to see in a live bare knuckle, popular on fire element was Kimbo Slice fighting somebody. Kimbo Slice, in the modern generation of hundreds of iterations of bare knuckle throughout our last few thousand years, Kimbo Slice pioneered this segment. I like watching Mike Berry fight bare knuckle. I really do. I really like Mike personally, and I cheer for him. But I thought there was no way he was going to beat Michael Page. That was the one. I just thought there was just no chance he was going to beat him. And not only did he pulled a draw down to the end, in the last round, Mike Perry will beat anybody. In an overtime, sudden victory kind of environment, Mike Perry will beat anyone because that's a hard drive, desire, will, all of those things. But I'd like to see Eddie Alvarez fight one more. I'd like to see Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler fight bare knuckle. That's not going to happen, but I would love to see that.
Why not? Stranger things have happened. You never know. Michael Chandler probably coming to the sunset of his MMA career. So let's see. I've got to ask you about Dark Side of the Cage. Vice back in action. I think we missed Vice. I'm not sure quite what the story was there. There was a buyout, a hiatus, but Vice seems back with a vengeance in the fight sports world, because I remember when I think Fightland did prison fights. I think John Nutt, Dave LeDuc were involved in that back in the day as well. And they were always doing cool stuff. And you're a little bit at the forefront of Dark Side of the Cage. We had Diego Sanchez, Kimbo Slice. Tell us about that,
man. Somebody from Vice, a guy named Dave Hudson, approached me about a year and a half plus ago and said, the Dark Side, world on Vice is really popular. They like it. The audience likes it. It's an everybody wins. In pro wrestling, which I don't follow, the audience loves it. The wrestlers love it. Vice loves it. It's everybody wins. He's like, what do you think if we were to try to develop a Dark Side of the Cage? And I'm like, well, if we look at the stories of these humans, independent of the promotion that they fight in, we are bombarded with messages from a corporation that promotes fighting. Let's go underneath that and look at these human stories. And so we started to develop them. And then Vice was very on board. It's an amazing series. It's been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever worked on. I'm the creative consultant for the whole series. So I worked on every episode as part of a team. And then I'm the fight coordinator for all the reenactments. So I go into shooting and reenact Nick Diaz and Joe Riggs fighting in a hospital. I reenact the dojo storm that created Pride, where Hickson was dojo stormed by Anjo in California. We recreate some of the most incredible moments ever in fighting. It's an amazing series. This week, as we're talking right now, the next episode coming out is Nick Diaz. And we got Nick Diaz. I don't want to take too much of the credit, but I spoke with Nick and he promised, he said, I want to do this with you. He said, sometimes it's hard to track me down, and sometimes please stay with it. And if I'm telling you I'll do it, I'll do it. And even with that, I was in middle of the night flights in the darkest areas of Texas, a place called Sunnyside in Houston. As the sun was coming up, there were people smoking crack and prostitution. And he likes to live in these areas. That's where Nick has always lived. And I'm a Canadian goofball who hasn't slept all night wearing a Versace bag in Sunnyside, Houston, Texas, one of the most violent crime areas in the world, knocking on a Airbnb that looking in the window and it's empty and Nick isn't there and I've got to try to take him back to California. Like, it was crazy. But we got Nick to sit down for a couple of hours and he hasn't done that in 10 years. So this episode will come out next and it is Nick Diaz telling Nick Diaz's story, and it's amazing. The 10 episodes are incredible, but this one, to me, this is a once in a lifetime storytelling and a once in a lifetime moment. Nick's not going to sit down for anybody for a couple hours, maybe ever again. And he hasn't done it in 10 years. So it's been an amazing, A Dark Side of the Cage is an incredible series. It's an incredible experience. Yeah, one of the most fulfilling things I've ever worked on.
Beautifully described. That's just gone right to the top of my list of things to watch. That episode specifically. There's something about that dude. For the casual fan, can you just summarize the magic of Nick Diaz and why we gravitate towards him as fans of combat sports?
Mixed martial arts fighters and boxers and popular combat artists are professional athletes. Many of them wear suits at press conferences. They've been media trained. They have structure, diet, periodized peaking of it's science, right? Nick Diaz is the absolute last of a generation where he's the toughest motherfucker in his neighborhood and he likes fighting. He's uncomfortable with anything in the world except for fighting people. And he also hates fighting people. He hates fighting. He hates the fact that this is what he has to do for a living. He's just so complicated. You can't possibly have another Nick Diaz, somebody who, hates the corporations, hates business, hates, media, doesn't want to do any of this. He'll fist fight for money because that's what he has to do. And he doesn't follow anybody else's rules. He's totally counterculture. He's as real as it fucking gets. In a world of bullshit, Nick Diaz is as authentic a human being as you can find. And he fights like a badass. And he's courageous and a crazy risk taker. And there will never be another Nick Diaz. And he wants no part of any of this bullshit with television and quotes and Twitter beefs and, contracts and none of that. So you'll never have another one of him. He's one of one forever. And his life hasn't been easy. He's a full warts and all anti-hero. And if you're new as in only 10 years of following, free fighting, mixed martial arts, whatever you want to call it, you might not know who he is. You might know Nate, and Nate's an authentic bad motherfucker too. Of course, that's his little brother who has always looked up to Nick. You might know Nate Diaz, but if you don't know Nick Diaz, you are missing an entire understanding of what professional fighting is and has been and will probably never be again.
Absolute legend of the game. It's true, though, but there is that slight generational thing. Maybe somebody like over the age of 35 would know Nick Diaz, but the younger audience, they're all going to know Nate. Well, particularly as he fought Jake Paul, which is crazy to think about. Can I get your opinion on Jake fighting his brother Logan? Because what I love about your page is there's such a breadth of combat sports, from karate combat to the old school days, for what's happening right now, to football fights. It's awesome. But
thank you.
We're forced to, I think, accept, the Paul brothers are a part of combat sports. Jake has achieved some stuff as a boxer, probably won't be a world champion. Now he's fighting his brother. What do you make of it?
When there's a professional fight, professional boxing match, whatever, and it is sanctioned by sports governing bodies and bets are taken on it, the fact that the world thinks that, these are fake, or that, that a young, athletically fit, probably enhanced athlete would need to fake a fight or fix a fight to beat a 60-something-year-old Mike Tyson. That's just insanity, right? However, the difference as to what people are missing is that when you put the label, uh, what do they call it? Exhibition. If you put the label exhibition on something, it is no longer a professional sanctioned fight. And that is pro wrestling. My suspicion is that Jake Paul and Logan Paul will have an exhibition match. And if they have an exhibition match, this is no longer sanctioned. It's really difficult to have this conversation with a person who doesn't know anything and hates that Mike Tyson lost and in their mind needs to explain it only through this must be fixed, because that cannot be fixed. You'll go to jail for 100 years. You'll be buried in the desert by MGM Grand if they lose $100 million because you fixed a fight. It cannot be done in modern times. The second you put exhibition on it, it is fake, right? And so that word changes everything. And I suspect we'll see that word when Jake and his brother take as much money as they can get to harvest people's hate and desire to see them lose and get embarrassed and whatever, and they'll harvest those emotions to get paid to put on an exhibition match. Jake Paul, I'm not mad at him. If I choose to watch him fight Mike Tyson or anybody else in an actual fight, and it sucks or I'm not entertained, I chose that. If you're not choosing it because you're being controlled, manipulated by his desire to manipulate your emotion. Anybody who's ever typing angrily into their computer about Jake Paul is literally doing what he wants you to do. If you're in there, this guy sucks, this fight's fake. If you're doing any of that, if anyone watching this ever leaves a negative, angry comment about how much Jake Paul sucks, you are paying Jake Paul. All he's trying to do is make you do that. The fights, the exhibitions, the way he talks is entirely designed to light your emotion and then harvest it for money, influence, and power. So if you do that, you're part of it. The fascinating part of that is when you extrapolate that a little further. If I talk to somebody about the UFC, if I talk to somebody about Paul Hughes, who fights for the PFL, who is probably the top 3 or 4 featherweight in the world, certainly the best prospect in the world. If I were to talk to somebody about that, they would be quoting back to me words that the UFC marketed to them. So these things are valuable because they allow us to look and go, wait a second, how many of my opinions, and fighting, no big deal, politics, life, the environment, money, any of these, finance, any of these things, how many of these are my opinions and how many of them have been force-fed onto me? And a Jake Paul versus a Logan Paul can allow you to see that in such a fiery way that you can now kind of look back on the rest of your world and go, where am I being indoctrinated with beliefs? And that doesn't just go for if you think Jake Paul rules. It goes for if you're mad at him as well. You've been indoctrinated to have a emotional response, which you're now having, which pays him. And so some of these things are fascinating in how they can allow us to see the world. Fighting is just an analogy for life. And the fight business is just a microcosm of life, just like baking is, and just like being a coffee maker is. Everything allows you to see, if you look in detail and you're able to see the little microcosm you're in, you can apply that to everything. You asked me about Jake Paul versus Logan Paul, and I went on a tangent, but that's what I do.
Yeah, well, you got. If nobody's seen it, check out the tangent on Robin's page. It's awesome. I always enjoy it. I've
Thank
got
you.
to ask you though about our mutual friend then, if we're going to talk about the fight business, because now there's everything for everybody. You can watch pure stadium Muay Thai, 4-ounce gloves Muay Thai, UFC, PFL, karate combat. Let's talk about John Nutt and Fight Circus. I recently commentated on Matt Brown versus Blob Tang and Mark Coleman, Hall of Famer, up against John Nutt in wheelchair boxing. So we have the other end of the entertainment spectrum.
Yeah.
Would love to have your take on it.
So I love John. John's like his family, and I love what he's doing. I think it's the logical thing to do for me. One logical thing to do when something is moving some way is just take it to its ultimate destination. If Jake Paul actually has a contest against Logan Paul and it's an exhibition, it's disguised as a real fight, in such a way that it's blurring reality. John Nutt versus Mark Coleman in wheelchair boxing, that we know what that is, and it's like it's primary colors, right? Like it's bright and I love it. I love it. I'm a lot more of a fan of taking it that far, playing with it. I just spoke with Josh Barnett, who is a genius, right? Josh Barnett. I just spoke with him for a podcast I do for Vice around Dark Side of the Cage. And I didn't ask Josh Barnett about John Nutt and about Fight Circus, but I would love to ask Josh Barnett about it, because Josh Barnett's understanding and his own lifelong perspective of a fist fight in a garage versus an arena full of pro wrestling, he's done everything in between. I suspect, I don't want to speak for Josh Barnett, but I suspect he would appreciate it. And he's a true connoisseur of it. I think what John Nutt's doing, I think Fight Circus, it's also, man, this what might sound crazy to somebody who just sort of from the outside observes fighting and people like are, what we do. But I barely watch the UFC, right? I barely watch it. I consume no commentary, no created narrative, no behind the scenes. Anything that corporation made is made to make you think something or buy something or behave in a certain way. Every single time you turn it on with the sound on, it's trying to get you to think in a certain way. These are the best ever. This is the greatest ever. The number one ever. The winner gets a this. And who's the greatest of all? It's designed to dominate your thinking. These narratives are designed to dominate your thinking. So the second you remove them, you're able to, and not the second, you have to remove them for years to start to allow some other truths about martial arts and the business of martial arts to allow to get in. Because if there's this conversation of the casual versus the hardcore, the most casual of all consumer of fighting is somebody who mainlines UFC, because they're actually not consuming martial arts. They're consuming marketing. They're consuming raw, nonstop, hype-driven marketing, which shapes their thinking. And the arguments that they have with each other after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of marketing has drilled into their head is so illogical. It just allow them to sit over there and yell at each other about, the third last light heavyweight versus the light heavyweight from 6 months ago, and who's the greatest of all time, and what's next for this guy. It's just nonsense, right? Because it's just marketing. As soon as you remove that, you're able to get a much bigger view of the whole thing, where and what the UFC in particular, but many of the largest fight promoters and companies, they were once counterculture. They were outsider. They were punk rock. Your family thought you were crazy that you watched that kind of stuff. Now it's McDonald's, Coca-Cola, the UFC, big, Jake Paul's fights, whatever. These are all so unbelievably mainstream. So in a world like that, if you're not constantly bombarded from it, suddenly a fight circus is just so fun and so interesting and so creative. It's like punk rock. Why was punk rock? And again, I'm old, right? So I wasn't around consuming punk rock in the 1970s. I was 1 year old or whatever. But when you look at it historically, why do things like this happen? They happen because the mainstream is so corporate and so repetitive and so boring, and so your parents like it. And so in a world like that, you need something a little more interesting. You need innovation. You need disruption. You need outsider shit. I'm like that. And that's just a personal feeling. It's not better or worse. I just happen to be like that. So in that context, yeah, give me a karate combat. It's weird. I wear makeup on that fucking show. You know what I mean? It's weird, but it's also the fights are brilliant. Give me a fight circus. Give me a fight circus on a Saturday night in a nightclub in Bangkok. That's counterculture, right? If you just turn on every Saturday night and hear the same marketing over and over, the same thing, you can do that by all means. Some people love stadium, classic rock, and that's what that is. And there's a place for all of it. Obviously, people love it when something is massive. At the very least, you have to respect its ability to control the thinking. And the UFC and many of the Jake Paul is. I don't know that Dana White still hates Jake Paul. People are large scale business people have relationships very different from the public ones that they let us know. But he's another guy who's been capable of controlling the thing. The UFC is a great show. Jake Paul puts on giant fights. But mostly what these people do best is make us think they do that. What's easier, to have all the best fighters in the world or to make an audience think you do? What's cheaper and easier? Way easier to make people think that. And you can extrapolate that further. I live in Canada. You live in Malaysia. Yeah. So what is easier to have all the greatest fighters in the world? What's cheaper and easier? Have all the fighters in the world or to have just good fighters and make the audience believe you have all the best fighters in the world? You take that a step further. You live in Malaysia. I live in Canada. My friends live in America. What would be easier? To make Malaysia or Canada or America the greatest country in the world, or to convince the population that they live in the greatest country in the world? Way cheaper and easier to just make people think that. And so this is how modern, manipulation is a big word, but this is how the world works. Messaging is powerful. And so if you consume the same product all the time, they tell you it's the best, it tastes the best, it looks the best, fights are the best, these are the best. The UFC, 80%, I don't know what the number is. A very large percentage of the fighters that they have, they get through the Contender Series, because the Contender Series, you can sign them really, 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 really cheap. Make them sign in advance that you have them for years when they're desperate to be part of it. And then tell their story a bit so the audience already likes it, and then put them out there and say, these are the best. That's way cheaper and easier than signing Gegard Mousasi for $800,000, who doesn't want to play along all that well because he's an experienced, wonderful fighter. You can just tell the audience he sucks, and you can tell them this $10,000 fighter that or these $210,000 fighters are the best in the world. And marketing will allow that. Marketing is cheaper than signing the best and easier to control. And that's it. But you have to remove yourself from the nonstop bombardment of messaging to even be able to see this, right? But I'm fortunate. I have a business that is 10 times more successful than it was when I just covered whatever everybody else covered. And I have my own voice now by removing myself from the nonstop marketing.
What an amazing position to be in. And I've seen it grow in recent years. It's amazing. It's super inspiring. I just want to ask you, because it's interesting to your point. I remember when you were on Rogan, I think a couple times back in the day, and he speaks super highly of you. How powerful is he? And also, we both commentate. How powerful is he and how influential for the casual fan to have the biggest podcaster in the world sat there in the UFC? It's wild if you think about it.
So when you look at the great Joe Rogan, you can say, well, he's the biggest podcaster and he's a UFC commentator. Or you can say he's a UFC commentator and he's the biggest podcaster. I think of Joe as super consistent in that if we go back to the way he spoke in the world and the way he did comedy, and then maybe to a lot of people, the very first time they ever saw him was Fear Factor. What did he do on Fear Factor? He saw the way that the whole world did game shows. He thought it was boring, repetitive, and old, and he did it a different, authentic way. It's like, oh, gross, blah, blah. He didn't. Did he plan that? Was it a strategy? Sort of, maybe, but I think he literally just went, game shows suck. I find them boring. I think most people, whether they realize it or not, find them boring. And I think we should be a real person in this environment. And it was cool. Joe Rogan parallel to that, and before it and after it, was a commentator of fighting. Joe Rogan sat there watching people commentate, probably non-judgmentally, but he was like, why do they speak in code? Why do they all act like they're newscasters? I'm just going to say, talk like a guy who is a martial arts expert, who loves martial arts, and be real and authentic. So Joe took fighting commentary, which was boring and repetitive and overly formal, and he made it real and authentic. When he did a game show, it was weird and highly structured, and he just did it real and authentic. Then podcasts came along. He certainly had no idea where it would be today. And he was like, news and talk shows and the way people talk is boring and repetitive and highly structured. I'm just going to get high with my friends and do it regular. Joe's been hyper consistent through that entire time. He looked at the world and said, why are y'all acting so weird? Let's just be regular people and be real. And that consistency has carried through entirely. And now when other commentators commentate, a lot of them sound like Joe Rogan. They don't sound like what came before him, which was, that guy's for real. That guy, no joke. No joke is not a commentary statement. No joke is a Joe Roganism. And over time, I try not to do that, because what made Joe Rogan special wasn't just what he's saying, although that is special. It was that it was unique to him. So anybody who is a podcaster, game show host, commentator, or anything, if you love and appreciate what Joe Rogan did, don't imitate it. Do what he did, which was be authentic. And Joe has taken authenticity, who and what he is. And yeah, in a world of bullshit, the truth is really powerful. In a world and it doesn't have to even be the truth as everyone sees it, your truth. If everybody is trying to figure out how to say the right things and what to do and how to hedge your opinion and not offend anybody and make sure you make a step, if everybody's strategizing how to talk, just fucking talking will always be more interesting. And scarcity has inherent value. So whatever everybody's doing in any business, you might look at it and go, I'd like to do that. But you know what I didn't do when I went to commentate? I didn't think, I want my chance to say knockout power in both hands, striker versus grappler in a stylistic matchup, winner gets a title shot. When do I get my chance to say that? I didn't want to do that. I simply loved fighting and thought, wouldn't it be great if I could somehow get to spend all my time thinking about it and talking about it? And how could I do that in my way that could possibly bring value to an audience? But if they don't like it, and a lot of them don't, I can't allow that to shape me, because what that'll do is make you just like everybody else. And one, I have a wonderful career by not being just like everybody else. And two, I'm happy by just being a person doing a thing that he loves. The second I have to, Joe actually, Rogan recommended me to the UFC, and Dana White sort of tried to hire me and put me in their system with some of their producers, and I did some work within YouTube for them, and some commentary work for some Fight Pass things. And the second I was in there, executive producers were like, have you thought about going to a voice coach? And I thought, no. I mean, I'm open to improve any skill or ability or attribute, but I'm pretty sure that the executive producer of a sports television's voice coach will make me sound like a broadcaster. And in the time since, I know some of the people who have done that. I know some of the fighters personally, and they all kind of sound the same. And here we are. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's what those producers want. That's not what I want. And so if that's not what I want, my options are do it anyways, because wouldn't it be great to have a big job that pays, or don't do it and go off into the wilderness and hope that being my own person and having a lisp and not, and doing it a different way could actually allow me to pay my mortgage or to eat. And if it doesn't, will I still do it my way out of love all day, every day, and get a regular job to pay my mortgage and feed my family? And the answer is yes, I would. So I went and those moments in your life where you're like, this feels wrong, but I could just stick with the status quo. And no, I believe in what I'm doing, whether or not it succeeds. Those are giant moments in your life. And when I wake up in the morning very happy, live in my own studio, do it like making a shocking amount of money for now, years later, and doing all day long, just making cool stuff that I'm really proud to make for partners all over the world. Now it feels easy. But the moments you're doing it, where you have very little income and you have no guarantee that you'll have 900,000 followers who love what you do and encourage you to do it one day, it's really hard. And it's easy for me to say now, oh, you got to stick with your own thing and you got to stay authentic to yourself. And you got to be, it's really easy for me to say that now because it worked, right? Like it, I live in in $1 million house with my own studio in it, traveling around the world, doing cool things. But, in 2017, I had no job whatsoever. And the Fight Network had stopped. I had no job. And the UFC was kind of going, well, why don't you, fall into our system and quietly and politely do the voice coach and then do the small things and then send the right email to make sure that you let me, the producer, know that you got my back in the politics and doing what other people do. And suddenly you wake up one day and you're wearing a suit saying knockout power in both hands, striker versus grappler, sitting next to a cage on a broadcast that less people are watching than a YouTube stream. It's easy to say now that staying with what you believe is the right thing, but it's hard at the time. But it's worth it. It's worth it. And one of the ways you do it is just go, will I just, if this doesn't work, will I be happy still being true to myself? And if the answer to that is yes, fucking go.
Beautiful. As I said, man, it's inspirational. People love authenticity. You're killing it. I love the way you do it. And I've had the privilege of seeing a lot of your journey absolutely fly. On the editorial team, gave me 6 quick fire questions. Let's see if we can crush them out with like
Okay.
3-word answers. Most underrated fighter in MMA?
Gegard Mousasi.
What's a tougher arena, MMA commentary or glam rock concerts?
MMA commentary. Big, for sure. Glam rock concerts although glam rock concerts are full of people who paid money to come see you because they like you. But MMA commentary for somebody else is very difficult. But when you do it yourself with your own audience, it's exactly like glam rock commentary.
Best fight IQ in MMA history?
I don't know that. I think fight IQ is a term that is so general. It is actually, we're dumber for trying to use it because there's a million variables but if I'm just going to pretend I don't think that, thanks for watching. I'm just going to think out loud, and you just don't edit yourself. But it takes a lot of practice to not edit yourself for what you think your boss or the audience wants. Yeah. It takes a lot of practice, hundreds and hundreds of hours.
I came from a Fox Sports background, right? So I found it very difficult. And I still struggle with like how I'm talking to you now with like, we're doing television. Like, hi, I'm Andrew Whitelaw today. Yeah. We have a cage beside us,
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's weird. It shouldn't be hard, but it is hard. Yeah.
Mate, I've taken way too much of your time, so I'm going to just blitz through these. Okay, so the best fight IQ in MMA history. Fight IQ, not a term you believe in, I believe, but for the sake of the question and the traditional meaning, best fight IQ in MMA history.
You're right. I don't believe in it because it's such a catch-all umbrella that we are dumber for trying to use it. But having said that, George St. Pierre.
One fighter you think would excel as a coach?
One fighter that would excel as a coach. Uriah Faber, but he is a coach. Let me take a younger fighter. One fighter that would excel as a coach. Demetrius Johnson. I'm sure he coaches, but he's just so smart and so chill. Demetrius Johnson.
Yeah, good choice. I agree with you. And you must have a treasure trove. What's the most bizarre combat sports moment that you've ever witnessed?
The most bizarre combat sports moment I was ever in was I was fighting this kid in Edmonton, and I took him down, and I kept punching him to the side with the only I would free my right hand and hit him for like 4 or 5 minutes straight. And I went back to my corner. My coach was here, and when my coach moved, I saw him, and he had like a giant tomato that, as he walked towards me, it bounced. So I took him down and I hit him, and it exploded. And I mean, exploded like blood and pus, and
Ugh.
it was a red mist, and it got all over Boss Rutan, and who was commentating, and it was the highlight of the week on Inside MMA that week. I exploded that kid's ear big, big. And then he came up to me after, and his whole side of his head was taped, and it was red. And he was like, "That was cool, right?" And I was like, "That was super cool."
Hell yes. And now you work with Bas Rutten in Karate Combat. Who's your favorite martial artist of all time?
My favorite martial artist of all time is Bruce Lee. And I now work for his family. I have a partnership with Bruce Lee's family, and of all the things I get to do and may ever do, that's the one. If you told me when I was a kid, I would never believe you. I get to analyze and celebrate Bruce's movements, choreography, martial artistry, and philosophy, in partnership with his family and Bruce Lee, the entity now, on Bruce Lee socials, and I'm developing a show around Bruce Lee for Bruce Lee YouTube channel, and he is my favorite martial artist, because of the way he moved and the way he trained, but the way he saw the world as an extension of martial arts, and saw martial arts as an extension of the world. Bruce Lee is definitely my favorite martial artist of all time.
And since I didn't get to ask you about it, what's the coolest thing about the GFL?
The GFL is very cool, because I like innovation, and I like things that kind of break against the status quo. The people are cool. The fact that it's different, the fact that not everybody will like it right away, and there'll be pushback from the audience. There's a lot of cool things. It's really, it's. I've been doing less and less MMA stuff over the last few years. Some of it is repetitive, but the GFL is very different, and that's cool.
So many incredible things going on in your life. You're very good, kind of busy at the moment. So maximum respect. You've been super gracious with your time. We'll have articles, videos, reels, all sorts coming your way over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, brother. Good to see you again, my friend. Let's do this again sooner than later.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll be back out in Phuket with John doing Fight Circus later this year. So we'll see what happens. We're going to do stuff with Matt Brown. Matt Brown wants to start a Letway promotion with John. Let's see what happens there.
One of the proudest sort of accolades, and I'm not really about accolades, but when the Burmese people voted me Letway Analyst of the Year that year, we commentated Dave's fight. That was pretty brilliant. The Burmese people that are special, so I hope they like it. If Matt Brown's involved, they'll like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a legendary time, man. Yeah, I remember that. 2019. I was nominated. You won.
Yeah.
Fucking legendary.
Yeah, well, we were a team, so we both did. But I
Smashed it.
love you, man. I
All
gotta
right.
run. Thank you so much.